My name is Martin Kuppinger. I'm Principal Analyst at KuppingerCole, and I'll talk about cloud first and now. Operations, integration, security, identity. So all the considerations for successfully rolling out and executing your cloud first strategy. And by the way, back to the app. Jenny already mentioned our events app, and linked to my keynote, there's the market compass for cloud backup and disaster recovery, a comparison of solutions in the space for cloud backup and recovery, which you can download by using the app. So install the app, use the app, click on My Session, and then you will find the option to download this market compass report for one of the areas which are related to getting cloud done right. So this as the so to speak first introduction, and let's directly right now dive into the topic. And as the title says, cloud first and now. So one of the things we very commonly observe is companies have a cloud first strategy defined. So someone is going out and says, we do a cloud first strategy. And I've been at a couple of organizations, and sometimes then reality differed quite a lot from the sort of this buzzword thing where it's cloud first. But what is it really about? And if you define a cloud first strategy, there are a couple of things which need to be understood. So the first thing apparently is defining what is the cloud, or what is perceived as cloud in the definition of your organization. So is it only public multi-tenant cloud? Probably not. Or is it everything which doesn't run in your own data center? You need to define it. You need to have a definition for that. You need to have criteria for exceptions. So when not to use something you define as cloud, what are the alternatives and when to use them? Otherwise, you'll always have this discussion about, oh, but we can't shift this service for whichever reason. Many of these reasons are not very valid, but anyway, you will have these discussions. Define it from the beginning. Define the migration strategies. So how to shift from where you are today, which still might frequently be on premises, to where you want to be. And last but not least, you need to understand how to measure the cloud risk and how to compare it with the as-is state. One of the things which are frequently done wrong with cloud risk is that companies look at what is the risk of the cloud and then say, oh, this is a big risk. But they don't compare it with what they are doing today. And so it's a very unfair thing, which is very frequently still done. So you need to compare the as-is state to the cloud risk to understand where the risks are, to understand your mitigations, to mitigate risks. And then the picture very frequently will look quite different, because one of the simple things is large cloud providers, large service providers usually have far bigger teams for security than you in your organization ever will be able to afford. So they have these strong specialized teams, and this is really a difference in here. So when you start looking at this, then as I've said, one of the first things is to understand what is, from your perspective, a cloud. So cloud or no cloud, and let's look at 4 criteria for your definition. When you look at the operating environment, one criteria which defines, from my perspective, whether this should be perceived as a cloud or not is the number of tenants. So how much is it individualized or standardized? And the other aspect, which is not only the number of tenants, but which is also the degree of standardization. So is it an environment which is really running for your organization only, very, very customized to your needs, your specific applications, etc., or is it something which is highly standardized, such as an Office 365 or Google Apps or others, where every tenant at least builds at a highly standardized environment? So you could create a picture, and I love these matrices and scattergrams, where you say the number of tenants could be between 1 and infinite, and the level of standardization could be between individual and fully standardized. And then when we look at various ways for operating IT, apparently our traditional on-premises IT would be in the lower left edge as well. But also if you do outsourcing so having someone who runs it, it is still individual and very much for one tenant. And also the private cloud, if it's self-managed, so if you say, okay, I just build my own private cloud, it still is something which is pretty much in the lower left edge. Some parts of that apparently, so the underlying infrastructure aren't, but most of it is. So a managed service provider model goes a little bit more to the goes up a little more and more, a little bit more to the right. So managed service providers usually serve a couple of customers with some degree of standardization, but very frequently also it's still pretty individual and not that many tenants. If you look at public or private single tenant clouds with multiple customers, and if you look at many of the SaaS services today, and also the PaaS services, platform as a service services, many of these are factually single tenant deployments. So I just take my history is in identity and access management. So if I look at many of the identity access management tools, they are factually single tenant. So per tenant, there's an install, there's an in the cloud which is operated, done right. That's okay, and I'll touch this in a minute. So then we are far more to the upper right edge. And so the traditional public multi-tenant cloud, such as Office 365, etc., this is where we have more or less potentially not really infinite, but very, very many customers, and it's fully standardized. And what you need to do is to understand what is, from your perspective, cloud or no cloud. You can shift this line, you can shift it far more to the lower left edge, but define it. Define also maybe levels of cloud where you say, okay, would be my ideal target state, but not necessarily it's for everything. It's a public multi-tenant cloud. So it also might depend on the use cases, on the types of applications where you say this is where I want to end up. But define it, understand it, make it clear from the beginning. So set the rules. The other aspect here to look at is tenancy, apparently. So is it fully multi-tenant? Is it single tenant? And it's absolutely okay to have applications which are run in some way as a single tenant application if they are well managed, which means microservices, container-based deployments apparently, and the ability that all your customizations and configurations are well segregated so that the provider of that solution can update all the tenants in an automated manner, which works quite well for even hundreds and thousands and maybe tens of thousands of tenants if done right. So it can be done, but you need to understand it. And sometimes you might feel better. It might be even better factually to be more on the single tenant side. And last but not least, there's elasticity. So one of the things I expect from everything which is called cloud, even in the own maybe more broad definition, taking into account more traditional models, that is elasticity. The licensing model, the pay-per-use model, that must be something we have. But the very first step is start with a definition of where do you want to end up, and start with the definition of the exceptions, when not to shift an application to it. And these exceptions should be very constrained. So when we look at the key success factors for cloud-first strategies, the first one is management and strategy. So this must be a strategic move, and there must be management commitment. So as I've said, which services to move, how, when, and whatnot. Your organization must change. It must follow the strategy. If you say we go cloud first, then apparently you have less own data center. Things are changing, and also services will be operated sometimes in a different way. It's a great opportunity, by the way, to get rid of some of the silos you have. because you will not need some things you won't need anymore, other things you will need more than before. Operations, you need to have adequate operating models, and these models differ from the type of cloud, from the type of service. There's always a tenant and a provider responsibility. You need to understand it for every single service. What is your responsibility as the tenant? What is their responsibility as the provider? And you need to have your operation in place for everything, which is your responsibility, but it also potentially is an audit for what is the provider doing. You need to select the vendors, and basically it's the same like selecting other vendors in IT. Do it so roughly, understand the cloud risk. This is part of it. And so risk assessment, vendor selection, here go very much hand in hand. And do it in a standardized manner. It's not a complicated thing to do. And we have, for instance, a standard approach for this cloud risk assessment, which can be very rough, which can be very, very quick, depending on what you want to do. But it allows you to understand the risks, the mitigations, and act accordingly. Security is an important aspect for sure. The cloud itself is not insecure if it's done right. But the way you do security is changing. And when you say cloud first, that is the thing which is done more into security. You implicitly say and inevitably say zero trust. Because then the logic is that you have devices which access your services. You don't build on the internal network anymore, so you don't build on the perimeter. So you need to change the way you do security beyond just the cloud security. You need to manage your identity as well, which is complex. But you need to have one view of identities across all the cloud services, across all the users, and across all the operating models. You need something, we call it identity fabric, and there are a lot of recordings from a previous virtual event you can look at. So understand what it means. Integration. So these cloud services are cool, ready to use, perfect, but you still need to integrate within. So you need to integrate cloud services with other cloud services and on-premise services and premise applications. So understand the integration need, understand how to do it. Again, elasticity and scalability are key, as well as pricing and licensing. If you look at these factors and if you take these into account, your shift to the cloud and your execution of a cloud-first strategy, so making this big buzzword reality, will become successful. What is your roadmap to the all-cloud IT then? So it's not done by using the credit card for purchasing a SaaS service. You need to do a little bit more. And you will end up with more agility, but agility always requires a frame in which it happens, a defined environment. So you need to have your definitions of what to do, which services to shift to which type of cloud, what is allowed, what is not allowed, etc. So define, start with your definitions, what you mean by it, etc. I touched this already. Also understand your limitations. If you're a manufacturing business, you have a factory floor on premises. So not everything will be cloud. Organize, adapt your organization. I, again, already touched this point. Architect, understand the architecture. So how does your future IT environment at a higher level look like? It looks different than with all the data centers you still probably have in place today. Then build. That sounds simple, but it isn't, because it's about management, hybrid cloud management, management of different types of cloud services, security, identity, integration, all that stuff. You need to prepare for that. You need to test. Does the overall framework work? And then you go into the various services. So you select the service. Again, then you test that service. You build it, you customize and integrate. You do the migration. Follow a standard procedure for that, for selecting your cloud service, for checking the risk, for all that stuff. Create your own standard methodologies, your own standard ways to do things. And then finally you run it, and apparently you should go into a continuous improvement of these services. And in some way, we have a waterfall, a very traditional part, which is setting the frame. So this is something you do. You should do it quickly. You should do it well thought out to start. And you have an agile part, which is then where you do small steps in your migration. Shift that service, shift the next service, maybe only shift parts of services, replace that service by a new cloud service or by a set of SaaS services. So that is then the agile part of it, where you step by step make your shift into the cloud to really execute on the cloud first strategy. There are some specifics to consider and to take into account when we go with this overall cloud first strategy. And as I've mentioned, there are some things you can't that easily migrate. So depending on which type of business you are, some parts of your IT will remain hybrid for at least long, maybe forever. So as I've said, manufacturing is a very common example, but also if you look at some of the traditional parts of, for instance, finance industries, like take insurance companies, which very commonly have still a mainframe running with some very legacy code, which they still need because this code is the foundation for maybe certain types of life insurance contracts or other long-running contracts. And it will remain active for quite a while. So at some point, maybe everything has shifted, but it will take its time. So don't ignore the reality when you go for a cloud-first strategy. And that is, again, what I've said at the beginning. You need to understand what are the exceptions. Keep them small, but understand where you might need these exceptions. So sometimes you then still, so some services might not be easy to use. So there's the term edge computing, I'll touch in a second. But apparently, lift and shift is an option for certain types of services. You just run a virtual machine instead of running it in your own data center. You run it on an infrastructure service platform, okay. But not everything will work that well. And apparently then your own tenant responsibility for lift and shift is far bigger. And you will not have all the advantages of cloud. So understand what to do, what it means, and where to make the shift for on-premise IT and where to remain on premises. So where do you end up being hybrid? And there's then the option of edge computing, which is the idea of bringing computing resources closer to the location where it's needed to reduce latency and increase availability. So cloud services and services in some way are moved to the edge of the internal network, or internal services are moved to the edge of the network for better access from the outer space, for mobile access, for IoT use cases, etc. This helps in certain complex hybrid scenarios to get things done better. So look at these concepts as well. And to close it, some key takeaways. Cloud first is the logical paradigm. It's more than just public multi-tenant cloud. Define the types of clouds you use and you are allowed to use when, for which use case, etc. You need clear guidance. You need an IT reorganization, and you need a strong backbone in management, security, and identity. It's not just using your credit card to procure a SaaS service. It needs a plan to go agile, and edge computing will become important. That's it from my side. Thank you.